How are you guys doing? Today is Wednesday, December 29th, 2021. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile on Myles Garrett. The elite defensive end for the Cleveland Browns turns 26 today, and my intention with this episode is to point out his statistics and numbers on a micro level to get a sense of what he does game to game, and to give a sense of his accolades, achievements, and his accomplishments to get a sense on a macro level of how dominant a defensive player Myles Garrett is. And of course, I can always go into the spiel of how many thousands of people are competing to play in the very few hundreds and even barely thousands of NFL slots. And not only that, to not only make a roster, not only to regularly be named a starter in the NFL, which in itself is an elite feat, but he's established himself as an elite football player amongst the elite football players. And just before I get into his story, I think I got to really kind of paint the picture. Myles Garrett stands at about 6'4" and 272 pounds. He regularly plays like pickup basketball and like yams on people. So he's in incredible shape. He has incredible size, strength, and length for his position. And not to mention that, like, even out of all of the defensive ends that do even happen to be his size, he even has the mental acuity to even get around that, because Myles Garrett has been consistent. He's been consistently put on the gold standard, and not even that. He's pretty much met or exceeded incredibly high standards granted to him, considering he was the number one overall pick out of college. So with that said, I'm going to jump right into it. Originally born in Arlington, Texas, Myles Garrett would end up playing high school at Martin High School in Arlington, Texas. And knowing how big high school football is in Texas, you can understand how, of course, how tough environments breed tough competitors naturally. And he would go, after establishing himself as a well-rounded athlete, even in track and field, he would go on to commit to play 3 years of football at Texas A&M. And of course, he played 3 years because that's the minimum amount of years that you have to play. His very first year would go on to be his age 19 season, his freshman year in 2014. He would go on to play 11 games for a Texas A&M team that would finish with an 8-5 record. They would go all the way to the Liberty Bowl, where they would end up beating the West Virginia Mountaineers by a touchdown. But in that season itself, Myles Garrett would go on to, of course, make the starting lineup as a freshman, which, of course, is a very tough thing to do. He would go on to break Texas A&M's freshman sack record in only 6 games. He would break Jadeveon Clowney's SEC sack record and finish with 11 sacks in his 11 games that he played, as well as he did that in 49 tackles, as well as 12 and a half tackles for loss. Following his very first season at Texas A&M, even though they weren't a championship team necessarily or anything close, Myles Garrett would make the second team All-SEC as a freshman. Very tough thing to do. And, of course, breaking these SEC records would, of course, set the standard. And many people definitely had their eyes on this person that has done something that no other defensive end in the SEC has ever done. So this transitions into his sophomore year with Texas A&M. And in his age 20 season in 2015, he will go on to start all 13 of the games he played in a season where Texas A&M finished with the same 8-5 record, as they ended their season with a 6-point loss to Louisville. And just for context, Lamar Jackson was on that Louisville team. But in his sophomore season, in the 13 games he played, Myles Garrett would finish with 59 tackles, the most tackles he would finish a season with in college. He also had 19.5 tackles for loss, which would also be the most tackles for loss he'd have in a season. He would finish with 11.5 sacks, half a sack more than his freshman season, which is the most sacks that Myles Garrett would put together in a collegiate season. He also finished with an interception as well, and he also forced 5 fumbles that season. Following his sophomore season, he would be named to the first team All-SEC. He was named a first team All-American. He was given the Bill Willis Award. He was and of course recognized by many as one of the best defensive players in college football. But following that sophomore year, he still had to play another year of college football because of the NFL eligibility rules. So he would return for his third and final year in 2016. And in his age 21 season, he would go on to play 10 games in a season where Texas A&M would finish with an 8-5 record for the third year in a row. They would lose in the bowl the second year in a row. This year they lost in the Texas Bowl to Kansas State. But looking at how Myles Garrett would go on to play 10 games, he would go on to suffer a high ankle sprain, like maybe 4 games in. But in the 10 games he played, he would finish with 33 tackles on the season, 15 tackles for loss, ensuring that for all 3 seasons he played at Texas A&M, he had a double-digit amount of tackles for loss. His 8.5 sacks that season were the least he's ever had in a season. He still had 2 forced fumbles and a fumble recovery, the lone fumble recovery of his collegiate career. At the end of the year, even though Texas A&M would finish with an 8-5 record for the 3rd year in a row, all 3 of the years that he was there, he would be named to the first team All-SEC for the 3rd year in a row, cementing that all 3 of the years he was in college, he would make the All-SEC team. He would make the first team. He would be a first-team All-American for the second year in a row. He was a unanimous All-American, and so that is how Myles Garrett, of course, established himself as the top prospect, where he was taken with the number 1 overall pick in the 2017 draft. And then looking at the other elite players that were taken in the first round, Jamal Adams was taken by the New York Jets with the 6th overall pick. Christian McCaffrey went from Stanford to Carolina with the 8th pick. Patrick Mahomes, the $500 million man, went from Texas Tech to Kansas City with the 10th overall pick in this draft. Marshawn Lattimore went from Ohio State to the Saints with the 11th pick. Deshaun Watson went from Clemson to the Houston Texans with the 12th pick. Marlon Humphrey went from Alabama to the Baltimore Ravens with the 6th pick. Tre'Davious White went from LSU to the Buffalo Bills with the 27th pick. And TJ Watt went from Wisconsin to the Pittsburgh Steelers with the 30th pick. Just to get a sense of how action-packed that draft class was. And ever since he was drafted by the Cleveland Browns, he has been a member of the team ever since. And starting with his debut season in 2017, he would earn his way into the starting lineup. And of course, he was dealing with a bit of injury in his very first season with the Cleveland Browns. He would actually go on to suffer a high ankle sprain, missing the start of the season. But in the 11 games he played, he would finish with 31 tackles. He had 9 tackles for loss, and he had 7 sacks on the season. He also had a fumble recovery at the end of the 2017 season. He would go on to make the all-rookie team, and the Cleveland Browns would finish with an 0-16 record. This was Hugh Jackson's last full season out of his 2, and of course, this was the last time I believe a team has gone 0-16 in a season. But Myles Garrett would, of course, come back, and in his second season, he would start all 16 games. And his second year would be the only time in his 5-year career thus far in which he started all 16 of his games. He very well could do so next week, but as of right now, that number sits at 1. In his age 23 season in 2018, he started all 16 of the games he played for a Cleveland Browns team that went 7-8-1. And of course, that's 7 more wins than last year, considering 0 plus 7 is 7. This is the year where Hugh Jackson got fired and Greg Williams got hired and had a winning record for the second half of the season. In the 16 games he played, Myles Garrett finished with 44 tackles. He had 12 tackles for loss, the first time he had double-digit tackles for loss in the NFL. He would also go on to finish with 3 forced fumbles, and he finished the year with 13.5 sacks. And this would be the first time he would log double-digit sacks, as he nearly doubled his rookie amount in 2018 in just his first year of being a starter and his second year of being a pro. He would be named to the Pro Bowl for the first time in his NFL career, and he would be named to the second team All-Pro. Thus far, this is the only time to date in which he was named to the second team All-Pro. And following his first Pro Bowl season, Myles Garrett would return for his 3rd season. And in his age 24 season in 2019, he would start all 10 of the matchups he played in a season where the Cleveland Browns would finish with a 6-10 record. He would start 10 games, the first 10 games of the year, but then he ended up getting in a brawl with Pittsburgh Steelers starting quarterback at the time, Mason Rudolph. I believe Myles Garrett swung his helmet at him. I don't take my exact word for that. But in that instance, he would get suspended. He tried to hit Mason Rudolph with his own helmet, and then as a result, he would get suspended for the rest of the season. In the 10 games he played, he would finish with 10 sacks, with a perfect sack-to-game ratio. He would also finish with 2 forced fumbles, as he had 29 combined tackles on the year. He also had 11 tackles for loss, so he would continue his streak of 2 straight seasons with double-digit tackles for loss. Following that lost season for Myles Garrett, which of course would probably go, which many people are aware that is probably going down as a learning lesson for him, he will come back for his fourth season with the Cleveland Browns, and in his second full season as a starter, he would go on to start 14 games in a season where the Cleveland Browns would finish with an 11-5 record. This is the last full season that the Browns have played to date. This will be the first time that the Browns made the playoffs since 2002, which of course means that it ended a 10, 12, 14, 16, 17-year drought of not making the playoffs. So yes, that was a very momentous occasion in Cleveland, and of course Myles Garrett was a big part of that. And my proof for that is not only was he named a Pro Bowler in his 4th season in the league, but he was also named to the first team All-NFL, recognized as either the best or the second best at the defensive end position out of all players in the NFL. In his age 25 season in 2020, he would finish with 48 tackles in the 14 games he played, which at that point would be a career high until he actually broke that career high in his last game that he played like a couple days ago. He would also finish with 12 sacks on the season. This would be the 3rd season in a row he finished with double-digit sacks. He also had 10 tackles for loss. That's the 3rd season in a row he finished with double-digit tackles for loss. He would defend 2 passes. He would finish with 4 forced fumbles, and he would have 2 fumble recoveries on the season. And like I said, he would lead the Cleveland Browns back to the playoffs for the first time in well over a decade, in almost 2 decades. Once the Browns made the playoffs after Myles Garrett was named to the first team All-Pro, the Browns, but going in, of course, this was the season where Kevin Stefanski was the coach of the year, and this was his first season being a coach. The Browns would end up beating the Steelers by 11 in the first round before losing in the divisional round to the Chiefs. The Chiefs ended up going to the Super Bowl where they lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but just to give you a sense that the Browns were actually pretty close, and Myles Garrett was a big part of the reason why. And of course, following his 4th season, that transitions into this most recent season that he's played with the Cleveland Browns. And in his 5th season, he would go on to, or so far this season, he started 15 games for a Cleveland Browns team that is actually pretty well in the playoff hunt for the time being. Right now, looking at their next game coming up, they actually face off against the Pittsburgh Steelers, as they have a 7-8 record. But looking at what they've done so far where we are at this point in the season, Myles Garrett has already broken a career high in tackles in a season, as he already has 49 tackles on the year. His 15 sacks this year are also a career high, as he broke that. His 16 tackles for loss are also a career high. He would also go on to register a forced fumble and a fumble recovery and a fumble recovery touchdown, his very first defensive touchdown of his career. Thus far, he's already been named to a Pro Bowl, but considering the season is still in session, they still have yet to name all NFL teams. But so far, we're 5 years in, and if we're actually looking at Myles Garrett's entire body of work career, we have 3 full seasons in which he's played at least 14 games, where he's established himself as one of the best defensive players in football, and he's been named a Pro Bowler all of those years. The other 2 years were his rookie season, in which he got hurt, and then his 3rd season, in which he got suspended for the second half of the year. Outside of that, when you look at all of the games that he's played, I think there's not that much of an argument against Myles Garrett being one of the best defensive players in football. And the crazy thing is, he is getting better. Like, statistically, this is his best season by a long shot, and he's still this is on pace to be one of his best seasons ever. Not by a long shot, because he's had a couple other virtuoso seasons, but we can see that Myles Garrett is definitely cutting down on his mistakes and growing as a player. And you can see him growing as a person too. And I can't wait to see what he does over this next year with the Cleveland Browns. And that's the good thing about having profiles for players that are just in the midst of their primes. You have no idea of what this next 12 months are going to bring. But with that said, I want to thank the College Football and Pro Football Reference websites for giving me all the facts and figures that I needed for this episode. And I, of course, want to wish Myles Garrett a happy 26th birthday. If you ever get a chance to watch watch him, he's wearing number 95 on the Cleveland Browns. He is must-see football. I would say, I don't want to jinx it, that where he's playing right now, he is definitely on the track to wearing a golden jacket one day. And I don't think that there's anything that he can do except like mess at this pace. If he plays the same way he does now, if he were to just even this out for another few years, I think that Myles Garrett can very easily cement himself amongst the greats if he hasn't already. With that said, I want to thank everyone for listening. I hope all is well. And once all of today's exhibitions and matchups are done, I am going to come back tomorrow on Thursday, December 30th for another episode. So until then, thanks for listening. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with another episode of The Elite tomorrow. Thanks for listening to my piece. I hope all is well, and peace out. And hopefully I'll have more to say about Myles Garrett next year.